Hello, my name is Jay, and welcome back to my Tech Vault. Today we're going to be talking about power supplies and how to make them a good investment in your system. Now, while power supplies, of course, do go obsolete, they eventually, are no longer useful. Power supplies are one of the few components in a computer that really are difficult, if not impossible, to ever go obsolete, because simply the power supply is something that the standards don't really change. The power supply can be used for multiple builds over again in the system, and a good power supply really never needs to be upgraded or until it really runs itself into the ground, or, as I said, the connectors become obsolete, which rarely happens. So let's take a look at just a couple of different things that I consider important when picking out a power supply to make sure that it's a good investment, because, people might say, well, why are you spending $100 on a power supply? But I'm saying, I'm spending $100 on a power supply that I can use for the next 3 builds, where you're just getting a power supply that you'll only be able to use for this one build and have to spend like $150 to get 3 different power supplies. So, a couple of things that I consider important. First off, the sound level. That's obviously important for people that don't want to have a loud power supply. You really want it to be silent. A couple of notable companies for that is, of course, Be Quiet. I did a review on one of their power supplies. EVGA has something where it stops the fan up until a certain load level, so it's also quite quiet. That's something that's also, I wouldn't say it's the most important, but it's something to consider. The next thing, of course, is efficiency rating and the total power rating. For me, efficiency rating is something I like to consider a gold or above, simply because over the course of 10 years, after you've used this for a bit, the amount of power that it's going to draw over that course of time is going to add up to a couple bucks. And it may be worth saving that little bit of money, especially when you're going to have the same thing for a long course of time. So I recommend a gold there. As for the total rating on the power supply, I say a 750 watt is a really good area. Obviously, Be Quiet only does it in 100 increments, so like 700, and then there's a couple other companies that do it as well. But 750 is a really good spot. So a couple things that do go obsolete in power supplies. First off is the connectors. Now, while I will say that most power supplies even have some Molex connectors, really we haven't seen any really big changes in power supplies or in the connectors that go into systems. Over the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, there hasn't really been too many big changes. The connectors are still the same. So if you get a power supply that's got a good amount of connectors, got a good amount of ability to upgrade, and it's also a solid brand that, of course, you don't have to worry about problems down the road, you have a pretty good deal there. A couple other things I want to make note of is that people ask, what's the ideal lifespan of a power supply? And I'd simply quote EVGA on their warranty. They say that they have a 10-year warranty, which pretty much means that if something goes wrong in 10 years, you got a power supply that you can replace, and you'll get a new one back. So I honestly can't imagine that being taken another way. It's literally, the power supply for them is a 10-year thing that they plan on people using. Now, whether you use it for 10 years or whether you do your research and get the right power supply to use for those 10 years is a different story, but that they plan for that power supply to be using in a system for those 10 years working and having no problems. So, as I said, I touched on the few things I consider important: noise, efficiency rating, power, and then of course ample connector support. So let me talk about why I say 750 watts for the power supply, why I recommend that such a good area. So EVGA has a little weird thing with their power supplies. As you can see, I have a few of them, and they have some weird things about them. First off, the 650 watt variants usually don't have the proper CPU support for higher-end motherboards. Obviously, it is 650 watts, so it is a mid-range system. But for example, I believe the ASRock Master SLI AC motherboard had 2 8-pin CPU connectors, and this was not an expensive motherboard. It was a pretty average motherboard. And they had 2 of them, and not 4-pin, 2 8-pin connectors. So I believe there's another one of these floating around, and we'll find that in a second. We'll just say that's one, even though it's a PCIe extension. 2 of these, and they didn't have 2 of those. And obviously, the motherboard needed it, but the power supply didn't have it, and so we had to get a different power supply. And so that may be something that not everyone runs into, but down the road when you're interested and you're getting a higher-end motherboard, maybe Threadripper comes out and it's super exciting, or maybe you have, a new i9 series that came out that's also really attractive and you really want it. So maybe that's something you consider. But the problem is you have, only so many connectors on your motherboards or in your power supply, so you have to, of course, go through and upgrade and do all that rewiring. Obviously, I hate rewiring. I hate wiring altogether in PC. That's the worst part. But you have to go through and replace your system, or replace your power supply. And of course, that's very annoying. So obviously, then you have to go through and sell it, and you have to get a new one. And obviously, that's going to end up costing you more money than you originally had expected. So connectors are, of course, extremely important. Noise is obviously something that's personal preference. I'm not really going to argue with you there. That's honestly your choice. But the power rating, 750 watts, is why I recommend that, is because the power supplies, especially EVGA, 750 watt power supplies come with both the connectors for CPUs, the CPU motherboard connectors, so you really want to make sure if that's something you think you're going to be upgrading in the future, that's also something to consider. Also, 750 watt is a good range so that even a high-end GPU and a high-end CPU, or maybe two high-end GPUs and a CPU will still be able to run fine on that system. I don't think that's going to be a problem, but I think that's definitely something to, of course, consider if that's going to be you down the road. Also, another thing to consider why 750 watts is a good area is because as, of course, power supplies get cheaper, and as power supplies, of course, get, for what you could get $70 3 years ago was probably like a 500 watt power supply. Now with $70 you can get a 650 watt power supply. Power supplies are slowly getting cheaper and better at the same time. And as the average computer user or enthusiast computer geek, I guess, gets more and more power supply capability, the NVIDIA, AMD, Intel all sit there and go, the average person has the capability to get this power to support the CPU with a higher power draw. Let's add that CPU in there. And of course you'll say, ooh, this is a new i7, this has got a slightly higher power draw, why not throw it in? And eventually that will creep up a small amount. The amount of power that, of course, is acceptable for a CPU to draw will, of course, slowly creep up. Over the course of 10 years, that shouldn't really be a problem. If you get something that's a pretty substantial amount, 750 watts is a good area. Would I recommend 1,000 or like 700, 1,000, 1,500, 1,600 watt power supplies, especially when they're $300? No, that's not really something you should consider unless you're right now, at the time of doing this video, you've got yourself a high-end Threadripper system with like 12 Vegas in there, and you're really having a fun time with that. That's the only time I'd recommend that. Honestly, 750 watts for the average person, even if you get dual 2080s, 2080 Ti's, or you get i9 9900K, all those things still shouldn't run into too many issues along the road down here. So now that that's taken care of, also a couple other things that I really think that are also important is if you get a power supply, make sure you get a decent brand, because there's a couple brands that I think are notable. I had some Seasonic people that say Seasonic is good. I actually haven't personally built with their power supplies just because I've actually gotten EVGAs recently, but honestly I have never built with them, so I can't make a personal judgment there, but I've had a lot of my fans say that those are pretty good, so that's the fan recommendation. EVGA, I've built, a number of systems with them. They're pretty solid power supplies as well. Antec does some good ones. Be Quiet has some nice ones. I've actually reviewed those as well. And there's a long list. But if you get your power supply, and it looks like this. It's got the nice shiny aluminum. It's about as light as my cell phone. And it simply feels a little cheap. I'd recommend getting a different power supply. Why? Well, because yeah, you're gonna fry your system if you do this. Just saying right now. Yeah, it's fried. It's gone. Well, it may not fry in the first year. By the second year, it's not happening. So that's been today's video. I hope you have a wonderful day. Check out the channel for power supply reviews, computer builds, or me just fooling around. But thank you very much for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day, and if you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Thanks. Goodbye.